If you can ride this bull, I'll give you $50 million. The words, sharp and disdainful, cut through the noise of the corporate gala. Judd Cole froze, his hand clutching a dustpan, the chaotic scene around him snapping into a silent, focused tableau. He was the center of it, the janitor caught in the merciless spotlight of his boss, Sloane Devereaux. She stood 10 feet away, a vision in emerald green, her expression one of bored cruelty. Behind her, her assistant, Garrett, wore a familiar, smirking mask. The arena air was thick with the scent of money, champagne, and failure. Sloane's prized possession, a monstrous bull named Widowmaker, snorted impatiently in its chute. All evening, professional riders had tried to conquer the beast for her amusement, and all had been violently tossed into the dirt. The bull was a symbol of her own untamable power, and she savored every victory. The challenge had been Garrett's idea, a piece of casual cruelty whispered to his boss. Spotting Judd and his young daughter, Willa, at the edge of the arena, he'd sneered, "Look at him. I bet he'd faint if the gate even rattled." Sloane, ever one for a spectacle, had taken the bait. Judd's gaze was locked on the bull. It wasn't just an animal. It was a ghost from a life he'd fought for a decade to bury. The raw primal fear was a taste in his mouth, metallic and suffocating. He felt a desperate urge to flee, to simply melt back into the shadows where he belonged. But a small hand found his. Willa. His 9-year-old daughter looked up at him, her face pale. In her wide, knowing eyes, he saw the agonizing hope the CEO's words had ignited. Willa understood their reality all too well. The medical bills that piled up like snowdrifts. The hushed, grim conversations with doctors about her failing heart. $50 million wasn't a fantasy to her. It was the price of a future. "Daddy?" she whispered, a universe of pleading in that single word. Judd's throat was tight. He looked from the beast in the chute to the brave little girl at his side. He couldn't, not just because of the soul-crushing fear, but because he didn't believe it. A woman like Sloane Devereaux didn't give away fortunes. She built them on the backs of men like him. This was a game, and he was the pawn. "No," he managed to say, the words scraping his throat. "I can't do that." Garrett laughed, his voice dripping with scorn. "I guess this janitor doesn't need $50 million, Miss Devereaux." The insult glanced off Judd, but the effect it had on Willa struck him like a physical blow. He saw the light in her eyes extinguish, her small shoulders slumping in defeat. That silent, heartbreaking acceptance was more than he could bear. In that moment, the world fell away. There was no crowd, no fear, no past, only his daughter and her stolen future. A fierce, protective love surged through him, drowning the demons that screamed in his mind. He took a shaky breath and lifted his head, meeting Sloane Devereaux's gaze. "I'll do it," the words hung in the stunned silence. Sloane's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. "But," Judd added, his voice finding a strength he hadn't felt in years, "I need your word." In front of everyone. "That $50 million, it goes to my daughter, no matter what happens to me." He stepped forward, his eyes burning with an intensity that made the CEO take an involuntary step back. "You shake my hand on it." Sloane stared, her mind racing. This wasn't the reaction of a simple janitor. She saw a flicker of something else in his stance. A coiled strength, a ghost of a man who was no stranger to high-stakes defiance. A slow, calculating smile returned to her lips. This was becoming far more interesting than she'd anticipated. She strode forward and extended a perfectly manicured hand. "You have my word, janitor," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. $50 million will be transferred to a trust for your daughter, Willa Cole, if you ride Widowmaker, witnessed by all. Judd gripped her hand, his calloused, scarred palm enveloping hers. The contact was a shock to them both, a collision of two worlds. "Get the paperwork ready," he said, his voice low and steady. He then turned and walked toward the chutes, not looking back. He was no longer Judd Cole, the invisible man who cleaned up after the rich. He was a father walking toward a reckoning, ready to face the beast that had once destroyed his life for the one person who gave it meaning. Sloane watched him go, a thrilling new question echoing in her mind. Who is Judd Cole? She turned to her assistant, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. Get me everything on him, she commanded. I want to know who I just made a $50 million bet with. The walk toward the chutes felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. Each step was a battle, a conscious effort to force his legs to move forward. The buzz of the crowd faded into a dull roar in his ears, a sound he hadn't heard in a decade. It was the sound of the life he had escaped, the life that had nearly destroyed him. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on his back, some curious, some mocking, all hungry for a spectacle. Behind the chutes, the air was thick with the raw, earthy smell of livestock, sweat, and fear. A few of the professional riders who had been bested by Widowmaker were lingering, nursing their bruised bodies and shattered pride. One of them, a lanky cowboy with a fresh gash on his cheek, stepped in front of Judd, blocking his path. "Hey, pal," the cowboy sneered. His eyes narrowed with contempt. "You the janitor? This ain't a circus. That bull's gonna kill you. What do you think you're doing?" Judd looked at the man's face and saw the familiar cocktail of arrogance and insecurity that defined so many in the sport. He didn't have the time or the energy for a confrontation. "Just trying to win a bet," Judd said, his voice flat as he tried to sidestep him. But the cowboy wasn't finished. "You got a death wish?" "We're professionals. We couldn't stay on him for 3 seconds. You'll be lucky if you leave this arena walking." He gestured dismissively at Judd's simple work uniform. "You ain't even got the gear." It was true. He had nothing. But as his eyes scanned the mess of equipment bags and discarded gear, he saw what he needed. Lying on a bale of hay was a worn leather bull rope, its handle braided with a familiar pattern. He walked over and picked it up. The moment his fingers closed around the coarse, familiar texture, a jolt went through him. A phantom memory of splintering bone and a scream that had once been his own. He pushed the memory down, his movements becoming automatic, methodical. He found a tin of rosin, its sticky pine scent another ghost from his past. He began working it into the rope, the motions precise and ingrained. A ritual his body remembered even if his mind wanted to forget. The lanky cowboy watched, his sneer slowly fading into a look of confusion. "Hey, the way you're holding that, who taught you to handle a rope like that?" Judd ignored him, his focus absolute. He found a right-handed glove, stiff and stained, and pulled it on. It was too tight across the knuckles, but it would have to do. As he flexed his fingers, another image flashed in his mind. A different arena, a different bull, and the smiling, confident face of his best friend Cody, giving him a thumbs up. The image was so vivid he could almost smell the cheap beer on Cody's breath. "Daddy?" Willa's voice cut through the haze of his memory. She had followed him, her small face etched with worry. "Are you really going to do it?" Judd knelt, bringing himself to her eye level, his heart aching at the fear he saw there. He forced a smile, though it felt brittle and fake. "I have to, sweet pea," he said softly, his voice for her ears only. "This is for you. This is so we don't have to worry anymore, so we can fix that heart of yours for good." "But he's so big," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the heaving mass of muscle in the chute. "He's scary." "I know," Judd said, his own fear a cold knot in his stomach. "But I'm scarier." He tapped her nose gently. "You just close your eyes and count to 8. By the time you open them, it'll all be over. I promise." He gave her a quick, fierce hug, breathing in the scent of her hair, trying to anchor himself to the one thing in the world that mattered. He then stood and turned to one of the arena hands. "Keep her back here. Don't let her get any closer." The man, his face grim with a mixture of pity and respect, nodded. "You got it. Good luck in there." Meanwhile, in her VIP box overlooking the arena, Sloane Devereaux watched Judd's every move on a high-definition monitor. Garrett stood beside her, scrolling through a tablet, his expression smug. "It's just as I thought," Garrett said, clearing his throat. Judd Cole, age 38, clean record. Worked a series of manual labor and maintenance jobs for the last 10 years. Factory floor in Ohio, warehouse in Texas, now this. No assets, no property, mountains of medical debt for the daughter, Willa. He's a nobody, Ms. Devereaux, a desperate man who's in over his head. Sloane didn't look away from the screen. She was watching Judd pull the glove tight, his movements economical and sure. She saw the way he tested the weight of the rope, the way his eyes assessed the bull's position in the chute. She had built an empire by reading people, by seeing the tells and weaknesses they tried to hide. And what she was seeing on that screen wasn't a desperate janitor. It was a professional. "A nobody doesn't handle equipment like that," she said, her voice a low murmur. "And he's not looking at that bull with fear anymore. That's something else. That's calculation." She tapped her finger against her chin. "Dig deeper, Garrett. I don't want to know where he's worked for the last 10 years. I want to know what he was doing 11 years ago." Down on the ground, Judd was ready. He walked to the chute, the wooden planks vibrating with the raw power of the animal trapped within. He climbed the rails, his boots finding the familiar footholds. The world shrank to the narrow confines of the gate, the bull's broad twitching back, and the endless, terrifying 8 seconds that lay ahead. He looked down at the beast. Widowmaker. A fitting name. He knew this bull's bloodline. He had seen it in the animal's eyes, in the powerful set of its shoulders. It was the same fury, the same untamable spirit that had ended his world a decade ago. This wasn't just a ride. This was a reckoning. He lowered himself carefully onto the bull's back, the heat of the animal seeping through his jeans. He wrapped the rope around his hand, pulling it impossibly tight, the friction burning his skin. This was it, the point of no return. He took one last shuddering breath, cast a quick glance toward the spot where he'd left Willa, and then looked up at the latchman. He gave a single, sharp nod. The past, the present, and the future were all about to collide in a violent, thunderous explosion of fury and dust. The world erupted. The instant the latchman yanked the rope, the chute gate flew open with a deafening clang. Widowmaker exploded into the arena not as an animal, but as a force of nature, a 1,400-pound cyclone of muscle and rage. The first jolt was a bone-shattering drop, designed to snap a rider's grip and send him flying over the bull's head. But Judd was ready for it. His body, acting on a decade of dormant instinct, absorbed the shock, his legs gripping tight, his free arm whipping through the air in a perfect counterbalance. The crowd's roar was a distant, hollow sound, like the sea crashing against a cliff. His universe had shrunk to the straining muscles of the beast beneath him, the burning friction of the rope in his hand, and the ticking clock in his head. 1 second. Widowmaker spun left, a violent, dizzying corkscrew motion that had sent the last professional rider sprawling. Judd moved with him, a seamless fusion of man and beast. It wasn't about fighting the bull's power. It was about redirecting it, becoming part of the storm. He felt the pull on his arm, the strain in his shoulder that threatened to tear the joint from its socket, but he held on. In her VIP box, Sloane Devereaux leaned forward, her knuckles white on the railing. The dismissive smirk was gone, replaced by an expression of utter, rapt attention. "My God," she breathed. Garrett beside her was staring at his tablet, his face pale. I don't understand. There's nothing here. He's a janitor." "That is not a janitor," Sloane said, her voice a low, intense whisper, her eyes glued to the impossible spectacle below. 3 seconds. The bull bucked, a brutal upward explosion that launched them both into the air. For a heart-stopping moment, Judd was weightless, suspended between the arena lights and the hard-packed dirt. A flash of memory seared his mind. Cody's laughing face, Then the sickening crunch of bone, the sudden, awful silence of a crowd holding its breath. He gritted his teeth, forcing the ghost back into its cage. This wasn't then. This was now. This was for Willa. He landed hard, the impact jarring every tooth in his head. But his grip was still true. He could feel the bull gathering itself for another assault, its muscles coiling like immense springs. The lanky cowboy who had mocked him stood by the rails, his jaw hanging open. "No way," he muttered to the man beside him. "That's an old-school move. The only guy I ever saw ride out a drop like that was Cole the Ghost Colton. Vanished years ago. 5 seconds. Widowmaker changed tactics, switching from raw power to chaotic frenzy. The bull kicked and twisted, a whirlwind of hooves and horns, trying to tear Judd from its back through sheer, unpredictable violence. Judd's world was a blur of brown dirt and bright lights. His arm screamed in protest, his muscles burning with lactic acid. He was losing his grip. He felt his hand begin to slip, the rope sliding, burning through the leather of his glove. "It's over," a voice in his head hissed. "You can't do this anymore. You're not him. You're just a janitor." Then, through the chaos, he pictured Willa's face. He remembered her counting, her eyes squeezed shut, trusting him. He roared, a raw, guttural sound of pure defiance, and with a surge of adrenaline, he readjusted his grip, sinking his spurs just enough to regain his balance. It was a move of pure desperation, a gamble that could have gotten him killed. But it worked. He was back in control, centered in the heart of the hurricane. 7 seconds. The bull gave one last, furious lunge. Judd held fast. The buzzer blared through the arena, a piercing, triumphant sound. 8 seconds. He had done it. A wave of relief so powerful it was nauseating washed over him. But the fight wasn't over. He had won the bet, but he still had to survive the bull. As the buzzer sounded, he expertly uncoiled the rope from his hand and prepared to dismount, searching for his opening. The bullfighters, clad in their bright, distracting outfits, rushed in, putting themselves between the enraged bull and the rider. "Get clear, cowboy!" one of them yelled. Widowmaker spun, its eyes wild, looking for a target. It found one. Judd. The bull lowered its head and charged. Judd pushed off, launching himself away from the animal, his legs weak and trembling. He hit the ground hard, rolling as a horn sliced through the air, missing his head by inches. He scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving, and sprinted for the fence, not stopping until he could vault over the rails to safety. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. The crowd, the cowboys, the VIPs, all of them stared, trying to process what they had just witnessed. They hadn't just seen a man ride a bull. They had seen a master at his craft, a ghost from the golden age of the sport. Then, the silence shattered. The arena erupted in a deafening roar, a standing ovation of thunderous applause and shocked, ecstatic cheers. Willa, her eyes now wide open, was jumping up and down, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. "He did it! My daddy did it!" Covered in dust, his body screaming with a pain he hadn't felt in a decade, Judd stood in the middle of the arena. He ignored the adoring crowd. He ignored the furious, defeated bull. He ignored the dumbfounded cowboys who were now looking at him with a mixture of reverence and awe. He lifted his head, his gaze cutting through the distance, and locked eyes with Sloane Devereaux. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just held her gaze, a silent, unyielding challenge that was clearer than any words. "The ride is over. Now you pay." The roar of the crowd was a physical force, washing over Judd in waves, but he felt disconnected from it, as if watching a scene from someone else's life. His body ached with a deep, familiar pain. Every muscle fiber screamed in protest. He was acutely aware of a sharp pain in his left knee, an old injury reawakened, and the raw, hamburger-like state of the skin on his riding hand. He had survived. He had won. And now, all that mattered was the woman in the box. He vaulted back over the fence, landing with a slight limp he tried to hide. As he moved through the area behind the chutes, the atmosphere around him had transformed. The cowboys who had looked at him with scorn just minutes before now stepped aside, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. The lanky rider who had confronted him just stared, his mouth agape. "Cole. The ghost Colton," he whispered to his friend, the name spreading through the small group like wildfire. "I knew it. I can't believe it." Judd ignored them all. His focus was a laser beam pointed at the VIP box. He found Willa, who ran to him and threw her arms around his waist, burying her face in his dusty work shirt. "You did it, Daddy! You were amazing," she cried, her voice muffled. He held her tight for a moment, the fierce, unconditional love in her embrace, a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. "I told you I would, sweet pea," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Now, stay with the arena manager. I have to go talk to the lady in charge." He left Willa in safe hands and began the long walk across the manicured lawn toward the grandstand. The partygoers, the titans of industry, parted for him as if he were a conquering hero. Their whispers followed him, a ripple of speculation and excitement. "Who is he? Did you see that? That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." He reached the private staircase leading to Sloane's box and ascended, his limp more pronounced with each step. 2 imposing security guards moved to block his path, but a sharp wave from Sloane called them off. He stepped into the luxurious suite. Sloane Devereaux stood waiting, a glass of what looked like whiskey in her hand. The amused cruelty was gone from her face, replaced by a sharp, analytical intensity. She was looking at him not as a janitor, but as a priceless, inexplicable asset that had just landed on her doorstep. Garrett stood nervously beside her, his eyes wide, frantically swiping at his tablet. "We had a deal," Judd said, his voice flat, devoid of triumph. He was too exhausted, too sore, too emotionally raw for anything else. He just wanted this to be over. Sloane took a slow sip from her glass, her eyes never leaving his. "We did," she acknowledged, her voice smooth as silk. "And it was quite the performance. The most expensive show I've ever paid for." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. You look like you're about to fall over." "I'll stand," Judd said. "I want to talk about the transfer." "My legal team will handle it first thing in the morning," she said dismissively, waving her hand. "The funds will be placed in a secure trust for Willa Cole, as agreed." "My word is my bond." She took a step closer, her gaze forensic. "Now that the business is out of the way, let's talk about something more interesting. Who are you?" Judd's jaw tightened. "I'm the man who rode your bull. That's all you need to know." "No, I don't think it is," Sloane countered, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "I made a bet with a janitor. A janitor did not just ride that bull. A champion did. A legend, from the looks of it. So, I'll ask again. Who are you, Judd Cole?" He met her gaze without flinching. "My name is Judd Cole. I work for you, and I'm here to collect what I'm owed so I can take my daughter and leave this place." "Leave?" Sloane let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, I don't think you're going anywhere." "Ms. Devereaux," Garrett interrupted, his voice trembling. He stepped forward, holding out the tablet, his face ashen. I found him." Sloane tore her eyes away from Judd to look at the screen. Judd's heart sank. This was it. The past he had run from was about to crash into his present. "It wasn't easy," Garrett stammered. "The records are old. Some are undigitized. He doesn't go by Cole anymore, but his full name, it's Judson Colton." Garrett swallowed hard, reading from the screen. "They called him the Ghost. Youngest pro-rodeo world champion in history at 19. Broke every record in the book. 2 consecutive world titles. He was undefeated for 27 straight months." He looked up from the tablet, his eyes wide with disbelief as he looked at Judd. "Then, 10 years ago, he vanished, wiped from the face of the earth, right after the accident." "The accident?" Sloane prompted, her voice dangerously quiet. The 2015 National Finals, Garrett read. A bull named Vengeance, a direct sire of Widowmaker, incidentally. Colton made the ride, a record-breaking 94 points. But on the dismount, the bull hooked his best friend and bullfighter, Cody Ryan. Ryan was killed in the arena. Colton was also severely injured. Broken femur, shattered knee, a career-ending injury. He was never seen in a rodeo arena again. The silence in the room was absolute. The name, Cody, hung in the air. A ghost that Judd had carried with him every single day for 10 years. He closed his eyes, the roar of that long-ago crowd, the screams, the sight of his friend lying broken in the dirt. It all came rushing back with sickening clarity. When he opened his eyes, Sloane was looking at him with a completely new expression. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hunger. The look of a predator that has just identified the rarest of prey. The mystery wasn't just solved, it was better than she could have ever imagined. A fallen champion, a tragic past, a legendary return driven by love for his child. It was a story worth more than any bull. "Judson Colton," Sloane said, the name rolling off her tongue like she owned it. "The ghost." A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. $50 million, she mused, looking him up and down as if he were a prize she had just won. "You know, I'm beginning to think I got you for a bargain." The name, Cody Ryan, echoed in the silent, opulent room. And for Judd, the world tilted on its axis. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his past came crashing down, burying him in an avalanche of guilt and grief. The sterile air-conditioned suite was suddenly thick with the coppery scent of arena dust and blood. He felt a phantom pain in his knee, so sharp and real that he almost buckled. He squeezed his eyes shut, his fists clenched at his sides. "That life is over," he said, his voice a low, ragged growl. "That person is dead. My name is Judd Cole." He turned to leave, his only thought to get to Willa and disappear before the ghosts of Judson Colton could fully materialize and devour what was left of his quiet life. "I don't think so." Sloane's voice cut through his panic, stopping him in his tracks. She moved to block the doorway, her posture radiating an unnerving calm. "The janitor, Judd Cole, is a ghost. The man who rode that bull tonight, he's the one who's real. And he is the most valuable asset I've seen in a decade." Judd stared at her, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He knew this look. He'd seen it in the eyes of promoters and corporate sponsors long ago. The look of someone who saw him not as a person, but as a commodity, a brand, a revenue stream. "The $50 million was for the ride," Sloane continued, her voice smooth and persuasive. "A transaction, and you delivered. But your story, the ghost returning after 10 years to save his daughter, that's not a transaction, that's a legend, and I want to buy it." "It's not for sale," Judd snapped. "We had a deal." "That's it. I'm done." "Are you?" she countered, taking another step closer. "Think about it, Judson. I'm offering you a second chance, not just to pay for one surgery, but to secure your daughter's future forever. You become the new face of Devereaux Industries. We build a campaign around you, endorsements, commercials, a limited engagement Legends tour. The story of the fallen champion who returns for his daughter. It's perfect. It's inspiring. It will make you a hero to the world, and it will make us both incredibly wealthy." Judd felt a wave of nausea. Go back? Back to the cheering crowds, the blinding lights, the ever-present shadow of death that hung over every arena. Back to the world that had taken Cody. The very thought was a violation. "No," he said, the word final. "Absolutely not. I want my money and I want to be left alone." Sloane's pleasant demeanor vanished, her expression hardening into the cutthroat CEO she truly was. "You seem to be under the impression that you're in a position to make demands," she said, her voice dropping to a glacial chill. "A $50 million transfer to a man with no verifiable history, based on a verbal agreement made at a party. My lawyers are going to have a field day with that. There will be verifications, background checks, tax implications. It could take months, years even. A process, she added, letting the word hang in the air, that could be greatly expedited by your full cooperation. It was a threat, elegantly delivered, but as brutal as a punch to the gut. He had won, but she still controlled the board. And then there's the media, she went on, pressing her advantage. Garrett found you with a few hours of searching. How long do you think it will take the real press once the story of tonight's ride gets out? And it will get out. So you have a choice. You can control the narrative with me, get rich, and be the hero your daughter sees you as. Or you can hide in the shadows while reporters camp on your doorstep, hound your child, and plaster your tragic past all over the news for cheap clicks. Which of those sounds better for Willa? Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking him right in his most vulnerable place. His love for his daughter. He had done the ride to save her, but in doing so, he had exposed her to a whole new kind of danger. The thought of cameras flashing in Willa's face, of strangers asking her about the father who abandoned his fame and the dead man who haunted him, made his blood run cold. He was trapped. She had laid the snare perfectly. He had won the battle in the arena, but he was losing the war for his soul, right here in this luxury box. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to decide, Sloane said, stepping aside from the door at last. You can come to my office and sign a contract that will make you a legend again. Or you can call your lawyer, if you even have one, and begin the long, slow fight for the money you're owed. The choice is yours. She paused as he stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of the ultimatum crushing him. Think carefully, Mr. Colton, she added, her voice softening with mock sympathy. Think about which path truly gives your daughter the life she deserves. Judd walked out of the room without another word. The sound of the cheering crowd, a distant, mocking echo. He had faced down a raging bull, but he was utterly terrified of the woman he was leaving behind. He had earned the money to save Willa's life, only to be told that the price was now his freedom, his peace, and the ghost he had sworn he would never become again. Judd walked away from the grandstand and back into the world of shadows he knew so well. The party was still buzzing, but the energy had shifted. He was no longer an invisible fixture. He was the subject of every hushed, excited conversation. He felt their eyes on him, their whispers like insects crawling on his skin. He kept his head down, his limp a steady, painful rhythm on the gravel path, his only goal to get to Willa. He found her by the deserted concession stand, patiently waiting with the arena manager, who now looked at Judd with an expression of profound respect. Willa ran to him, her face alight with a pure, uncomplicated joy that felt like a knife in his chest. "Daddy, did you talk to her?" "Is it real?" she asked, her voice brimming with hope. "Are they really going to give us the money?" He knelt and forced another smile, the effort making his jaw ache. "It's real, sweet pea," he said, pushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead. He couldn't bring himself to tell her about the strings attached, about the new, gilded cage being built around them. Her happiness was too fragile, too precious. "It's all going to be handled. We're going to get you the best doctors, just like I promised." Her relief was a beautiful, heartbreaking thing to witness. For the first time in a long time, the shadow of worry left her eyes. She believed him. She believed in him. And that belief was now the heaviest burden of all. They were given a small Spartan cabin in the staff quarters for the night. It was a world away from the lavish guest suites, with a lumpy mattress and a single, dim lamp. But to Judd, it was a sanctuary. After Willa, exhausted from the night's emotional roller coaster, drifted off to sleep, he sat on the edge of the bed in the near darkness, the crushing weight of Sloane's ultimatum settling over him. He was back in that motel room in Vegas, 10 years ago. The silence of that night had been just like this one, a deafening roar of what-ifs and if-onlys. He remembered the smell of stale antiseptic from the hospital, a smell that had clung to his clothes, his hair, his soul. He remembered staring at his shattered knee, propped up on a stack of pillows, knowing his career was over. But the physical pain had been nothing, a dull echo compared to the agony of losing Cody. Cody, his best friend, his brother, the man who had been in the arena for the sole purpose of protecting him. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the fog of time. The victory buzzer, the roar of the crowd, his own triumphant smile as he dismounted. He had been careless, caught up in the glory of a record-breaking ride. He hadn't seen the bull turn back, but Cody had. Cody had always seen it. He had thrown himself in front of the charging beast without a second's hesitation. The guilt was a physical thing, a cold, heavy stone in his gut. He was there to protect me, and I got him killed. Then came the media. The reporters had been relentless, vultures circling a tragedy. They hadn't seen a grieving, broken man. They saw a story. Was he reckless? Did his fame make him arrogant? Did he push the limits too far, costing his friend his life? They had hounded him, his late wife Sarah, and Cody's grieving family. They had twisted his silence into an admission of guilt. He had fled not just the sport, but the crushing weight of public judgment. He had changed his name, moved across the country, and taken jobs that allowed him to be invisible, all to protect the fragile peace he had left and to shield his daughter from a legacy of tragedy. And now, Sloane Devereaux was threatening to drag him right back into that same nightmare. He thought through her ultimatum, his mind a frantic mess. He could fight her. He could try to find a lawyer who would work pro bono, a David to go up against her corporate Goliath. But he knew how that story would end. She would bury him in legal fees and delays. The process would drag on for years, long after it was too late for Willa. Hope would curdle into a slow, agonizing defeat. That path was a dead end. Or he could accept her deal. He could surrender. He could put on the costume of the ghost again and dance for her. The money would be instant. Willa's treatment would be secured. She would live. But he would have to face the arenas, the crowds, the memories. He would have to look into the cameras and sell a sanitized version of his story. A story where the hero returns, leaving out the part where the hero feels like a fraud who let his best friend die. He would have to sacrifice his soul to save her life. The night wore on, a silent, torturous vigil. As the first pale gray light of dawn crept through the thin curtains, Judd looked over at his daughter. She had kicked off her blankets, one arm flung over her head in peaceful slumber. He saw the slight blue tint to her lips, a subtle, terrifying reminder of the faulty heart that beat within her chest. In that moment, everything became brutally clear. His pain, his guilt, his desire for a quiet, anonymous life. It was all a luxury he could no longer afford. His peace didn't matter if she wasn't there to share it. He had run from his past for 10 years, but he would run straight back into the fire for her. His choice was made. It wasn't a choice at all. It was a surrender. His hand trembled as he reached for his cheap, cracked smartphone on the nightstand. The screen showed 8:45 a.m. He found the business card Garrett had slipped into his pocket at some point during the chaotic night. A stark white rectangle with Sloane Devereaux's private office number. With a deep, shuddering breath that felt like the last gasp of his old life, he dialed. A crisp, professional voice answered on the first ring. Miss Devereaux's office. Judd cleared his throat. "This is Judson Colton," he said, the name feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "Please tell Miss Devereaux that I accept her offer. I'm on my way." The drive to the Devereaux Industries global headquarters felt like a funeral procession for the life Judd had so carefully built. He had borrowed a rusty staff truck from the ranch, and the vehicle felt pitifully out of place as he pulled into a parking garage filled with sleek, black luxury sedans. Every detail of this new world seemed designed to remind him of his place. The building itself was a monument to Sloane Devereaux's ambition, a shard of glass and steel that pierced the sky. The lobby was a cavern of white marble and cold, intimidating modern art. People in expensive suits moved with a silent, predatory grace. their eyes sliding over Judd's worn jeans and flannel shirt with barely concealed disdain. He was an anomaly, a ghost of a different sort, haunting a world where he didn't belong. When he announced his name to the receptionist, her professionally polite expression flickered with recognition. A moment later, a severe-looking woman with a tight bun appeared to escort him to the top floor. The elevator ride was silent and swift, his ears popping as they ascended into the stratosphere of corporate power. Sloane's office was less a workspace and more a throne room, with a floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the city below. Sloane was there, as was Garrett, and two sharp-faced lawyers who introduced themselves as the company's legal counsel. A thick, leather-bound document sat in the center of a massive granite table. The contract. "Mr. Colton," Sloane began, gesturing for him to sit. "Welcome, we have a lot to discuss." For the next hour, Judd sat in a state of numb disbelief as Sloane and her team laid out their vision. It was a meticulously crafted campaign designed to resurrect the Ghost and make him the living embodiment of the Devereaux brand. They showed him storyboards for a television commercial, a dramatic, slow-motion reenactment of his ride on Widowmaker, intercut with powerful imagery of Devereaux products. They showed him magazine ad mock-ups with his face next to slogans like "Untamable Spirit" and "The Legend Returns." They handed him an itinerary for a press tour that would take him from New York to Los Angeles. They spoke of him not as a man, but as a narrative, a brand, a demographic-appealing hero archetype. Then came the moment that made the blood freeze in his veins. The lead lawyer, a man named Mr. Klein, pointed to a section of the marketing brief. "The biographical element is key," he said in a dry, dispassionate voice. "We'll focus heavily on the 10-year absence. The tragedy is a powerful hook. The death of your friend, Mr. Ryan. It establishes the stakes, the sacrifice. It gives the story its heart." Judd stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the marble floor. "No," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Sloane raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Cody's name," Judd said, his eyes locking onto hers, the grief and rage of a decade finally boiling over. "You don't get to use his name. You don't get to talk about him. You don't get to put his picture in your commercials, and you don't get to call what happened to him Heart." He took a step toward the table, his scarred hands resting on its polished surface. "His memory is not for sale. It is not a marketing tool. You can buy my story, Miss Devereaux. You can't have his. That's not negotiable." A tense silence filled the room. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Garrett looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Judd wasn't finished. "And Willa," he continued, his voice shaking with protective fury. "My daughter. She is to be left out of this, completely. No photos, no interviews, no reporters waiting outside her school. You will guarantee her absolute privacy. If a single camera flashes in her face because of this deal, it's over." He was breathing heavily, his heart pounding. He had laid down his lines in the sand. He expected Sloane to call his bluff, to tell him to get out, to begin the long, slow war of attrition she had promised. Instead, she studied him for a long moment, a strange, unreadable expression on her face. It might have been the first time anyone had ever drawn a hard line with her in this office. Finally, she gave a slow, deliberate nod to her legal team. "Amend the contract," she said simply. "Clause 12A, image rights. Add a subsection prohibiting any mention or depiction of Cody Ryan. And in Clause 14, family provisions. Add a strict privacy guarantee for the daughter, with severe financial penalties for any breach. Is that acceptable, Mr. Colton?" Judd was stunned into silence. He had expected a fight, not an immediate concession. "I may be ruthless," Sloane said, as if reading his mind, "but I'm not stupid. Your authenticity is your value. If you're unwilling to sell certain parts of yourself, it only makes the parts I can buy more valuable." She leaned back in her chair. "We have a deal." The lawyers made the changes. The document was placed in front of him. With a hand that felt like it belonged to someone else, Judd signed his name, Judson Colton, for the first time in 10 years. He had sold his ghost. As if on cue, Sloane slid her phone across the table. "One more thing. The initial payment for your daughter's medical expenses. I need your bank account details. We're making the first transfer now." Numbly, Judd provided the information for the meager savings account he'd opened years ago. Garrett typed the numbers into a laptop. A few seconds later, Judd's old cracked phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a text from his bank. Deposit notification. $1 million. He stared at the number, at the impossible string of zeros. It was real. The money was there. The golden handcuff had been locked. Willa was safe. He stood up, put the phone back in his pocket, and walked toward the door without another word. "Mr. Colton," Sloane called after him, "your new life starts tomorrow. A car will pick you up at 7 a.m. for a wardrobe fitting and your first media training session. Don't be late." Judd didn't respond. He walked out of the office, through the cavernous lobby, and into the harsh light of the city. He caught his reflection in the building's massive glass doors. He saw a man who looked tired and broken, a man who had just won an impossible amount of money and lost something infinitely more precious. He had the means to save his daughter's life, but he had no idea how to save himself. The sleek, black town car arrived at precisely 7 a.m. Its silent, imposing presence a stark contrast to the rustic simplicity of the staff cabins. Judd watched it pull up from behind the thin curtain of his window. Willa was still asleep. He had spent another sleepless night, the $1 million in his bank account feeling less like a salvation and more like the first installment payment on his soul. He scribbled a quick note for Willa, telling her he had to go into the city for work stuff and that he'd be back later, leaving it on the small table next to a box of her favorite cereal. Every simple paternal act felt freighted with a new, bitter irony. He was providing for her by becoming a stranger. The inside of the car was a cocoon of black leather and silence. As it whisked him away from the ranch and toward the city, Judd felt like he was being abducted into a new life against his will. His first stop was not an office, but an exclusive, minimalist boutique in the city's most expensive district. The place was all chrome and white, and it smelled of money. For 2 hours, Judd was subjected to the prodding and fussing of a team of stylists who clucked their tongues at his worn-out jeans and faded shirts. They treated him like a mannequin, dressing him in clothes that cost more than he used to make in a month. He was forced into tailored dark-wash jeans, expensive leather boots that pinched his feet, and a soft cashmere sweater the color of charcoal. When they were finished, they stood him in front of a 3-way mirror. Judd stared, but he didn't see himself. He saw a stranger. The man in the mirror looked polished, expensive, and profoundly uncomfortable. He looked like one of Sloane Devereaux's people. It was a costume, and it fit him like a shroud. His next stop was a sterile conference room in a downtown high-rise. A woman with a razor-sharp haircut and a smile that didn't reach her eyes introduced herself as Brenda, his media coach. "Judson, great to finally meet you," she said, her voice a weapon of forced enthusiasm. "We have a lot of work to do. We're going to craft your narrative." For the next 4 hours, Brenda tried to sand down the rough edges of his life into a smooth, marketable story. She taught him how to sit, how to smile for the cameras, how to answer questions with carefully prepared sound bites. "When they ask about the last 10 years, she instructed, pacing in front of him, "you don't say you were a janitor. You say you took a decade for personal reflection and to focus on your family. It's about framing. When they ask about the accident, you say it was a defining moment that taught you what's truly important in life." Judd remained silent, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression grim. This was worse than he could have ever imagined. She was giving him a script for a life he hadn't lived, asking him to perform a version of his grief that was palatable for a morning talk show audience. "You're not giving me anything to work with here, Judson," Brenda said, her frustration finally showing. She clicked a remote, and a large screen on the wall flickered to life. It was old footage of him, from over a decade ago. He was 19, impossibly young, with a cocky, infectious grin and eyes that blazed with confidence. He was giving an interview after winning his first world title. "I'm the best there is," the boy on the screen boasted. A championship buckle the size of a dinner plate gleaming at his waist. "And I'm just getting started." Judd flinched as if he'd been struck. He was looking at a ghost, a boy full of fire and swagger, a boy who hadn't yet learned what it felt like to lose everything. "That's the man the world remembers," Brenda said, her voice softening slightly. "We need to find a way to bridge the gap between him and the man sitting here today." "That man is gone," Judd said, his voice a low rasp. The door to the conference room opened, and Sloane Devereaux swept in, looking at the scene with an impatient air. "How is our star pupil coming along?" "He's resistant," Brenda said carefully. Sloane's gaze fell on Judd. "We're not paying you $50 million to be silent, Mr. Colton," she said, her voice sharp. "We're paying you for a story. I suggest you learn how to tell it." "You want a story?" Judd shot back, his anger finally breaking through his quiet despair. "You just don't want the truth." Sloane walked right up to his chair, forcing him to look up at her. "I want the version of the truth that sells," she said, her voice low and menacing. "I want the version that makes people buy my products." "The version that makes you a hero, not a victim. Your personal feelings are irrelevant to our contract." He felt the walls closing in, the golden handcuffs tightening around his wrists. He was doing this for Willa. The thought was a mantra, the only thing keeping him from storming out of the room. Sloane seemed to sense his internal struggle. She straightened up, her tone shifting back to business. "Master this, because you're going to need it. Your first interview is booked for tomorrow morning, live." Judd's head snapped up. "What?" "The Good Morning America program," Sloane said with a triumphant smile. "They bumped a senator for you. The world wants to hear the story of Unki, the ghost. Tomorrow, you're going to give it to them." Judd stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. A live interview, in front of millions of people. He had just spent a day being stripped of his identity, and now he was expected to debut a new one on national television. He wasn't ready. He felt like a fraud, an actor who hadn't learned his lines, about to be pushed onto the biggest stage in the world. The polished, expensive stranger in the mirror was about to be put to the test, and Judd had a sickening feeling that both of them were about to fail spectacularly. The backstage area of the Good Morning America studio was a symphony of controlled chaos. Producers with headsets spoke in urgent, hushed tones. Makeup artists dabbed powder onto anxious faces, and the air buzzed with an electric, high-stakes energy. To Judd, it felt like the moments before a championship ride, but 1,000 times more terrifying. At least in the arena, the beast was in front of him. Here, it was all around him. He sat stiffly in a green room chair, the unfamiliar cashmere of his sweater feeling like a straitjacket. Brenda, his media coach, hovered over him like a nervous bird, relentlessly drilling the talking points into his head. "Remember, Judson, project confidence. You're a champion. When she asks about the past, you pivot. It's about the future. It's about Willa. Smile, and whatever you do, stick to the narrative." Judd just nodded, his throat too dry to speak. His narrative. It felt like a cheap suit, and he was about to be judged by the entire world on how well he wore it. Sloane Devereaux arrived moments before he was due on set, a silent, intimidating presence. She didn't offer words of encouragement. She simply looked him up and down, her eyes doing a cold, quick calculation. "Millions of people are watching," she said, her voice flat. "This interview will set the tone for the entire campaign. Don't disappoint me, Mr. Colton." The unspoken threat hung in the air. "Don't mess up my $50 million investment." Then, a producer appeared. "We're ready for you." Walking onto the brightly lit set felt like stepping into an interrogation room. The studio audience applauded, their faces a blur beyond the hot, blinding lights. He shook hands with the host, Catherine Vance, a woman whose warm, famous smile seemed genuine, but whose eyes were sharp and intelligent. He sat on the plush sofa, feeling exposed and utterly fraudulent. The interview started simply enough. Catherine asked about the ranch, the bull, the incredible ride. Judd managed to deliver the stiff, pre-packaged answers Brenda had coached him on. He spoke about rising to the challenge and finding strength he didn't know he had. He could feel how hollow the words sounded. He glanced at the monitor and saw a stranger, a well-dressed puppet, his face a mask of strained composure. In the green room, Brenda was wringing her hands. "He's bombing. He's stiff, he's cold. People are going to think he's a robot." Sloane said nothing, her gaze fixed on the screen, her expression unreadable. Catherine Vance, a master of her craft, sensed it too. She saw the disconnect between the legendary ride and the robotic man in front of her. She leaned forward, her expression shifting from polite interest to genuine inquiry, and went off script. "Judson," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Forget the ride for a moment. Let's talk about the 10 years before that. The world knew you as the Ghost, a champion who vanished at the height of his fame. There are reports of a tragic accident involving your best friend, Cody Ryan." She paused, letting the name settle. "Can you tell us about him?" The name, spoken so plainly on national television, hit Judd like a physical blow. The talking points, the carefully crafted narrative, all of it evaporated from his mind. He looked past the cameras, past the lights, and saw only the ghost of his friend. He had a choice. He could pivot, as instructed. He could retreat into the safe, sterile lies Brenda had built for him. Or he could tell the truth. He took a deep breath, breaking eye contact with Catherine and looking directly into the lens of the main camera, as if speaking to every person in their living room. "For 10 years, he began, his voice low and raw, the practiced polish gone. "I wasn't reflecting. I was hiding. After my last ride, my best friend, Cody, he was killed in the arena saving my life. The admission was stark, painful, and I broke. A part of me died with him that day. The fame, the buckles, the roar of the crowd. It all felt like a poison. So I ran. I became a janitor, a maintenance man, anything that would let me be invisible, because I felt like that's what I deserved." The studio was utterly silent. In the green room, Brenda looked horrified. "Cut to commercial!" "Someone cut to commercial," she whispered frantically. But Sloane held up a hand, silencing her, her eyes wide with fascination. "I never would have gone back," Judd continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But my daughter, Willa, she has a heart condition. And the medical bills? I wasn't just broke. I was drowning. When Ms. Devereaux made that offer, it felt like a cruel joke. But it was the only miracle on the table." He finally looked back at Catherine, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I didn't ride that bull for a comeback, or for the glory. I rode him because my little girl needed a fighting chance, and I believe any parent in the world would have done the same thing." He stopped, his confession hanging in the air. He had laid his broken, honest soul bare for millions of people. Catherine Vance was speechless for a moment, her own eyes glistening. "Judson Colton," she said, her voice filled with a profound, unscripted respect. "Thank you. Thank you for that." When they finally did cut to commercial, Judd felt emotionally hollowed out, but also strangely light. He had defied Sloane. He had broken the contract's spirit, if not its letter. He had told his own story, not hers. He walked off the set in a daze, expecting to be met by a furious Sloane and her lawyers. He rounded the corner and she was there, waiting for him. Alone. He braced for the tirade. She just looked at him, a slow, calculating smile spreading across her face. The look in her eyes wasn't anger. It was awe. It was the look of a master strategist who had just seen her opponent make a move so unexpectedly brilliant, it changed the entire game. "My marketing team just called," she said, her voice a low, impressed purr. "The network switchboard has lit up. Judson Colton is the #1 trending topic on every social media platform in the world. She took a step closer. I wanted to sell the story of a hero, but you just gave them something 1,000 times more valuable. What's that? Judd asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sloane's smile widened. A man. She turned and walked away, leaving Judd standing in the hallway, the applause from the distant studio audience sounding very, very different. He had tried to escape her control, but in his one act of rebellion, he had somehow given her exactly what she wanted, and more. He was more valuable to her now than ever, and he had no idea what that meant for his future. The aftermath of the interview was a tidal wave. Judd had expected anger, legal threats, the cold, swift termination of his agreement with Sloane. Instead, he was met with a tsunami of public adoration. His raw, unscripted confession had transformed him overnight from a rodeo curiosity into a national folk hero. He was the embodiment of a father's love, a symbol of quiet strength and authentic remorse. News headlines didn't call him a champion, they called him a dad. His phone, which had previously only buzzed with bill payment reminders, now melted with calls from unknown numbers. Garrett, in a stunning role reversal, was now acting as his frantic, overwhelmed gatekeeper, forwarding messages from news outlets, movie producers, and publishers, all wanting to tell his story. The story he had just given away for free. But none of it mattered. With the first $1 million in hand, Judd did the only thing he cared about. He took Willa to the nation's leading pediatric cardiac center, a place whose name he had once only dared to whisper in his prayers. They met with a world-renowned surgeon who spoke to them not in terms of odds and risks, but with calm, compassionate certainty. The experimental gene therapy is a perfect match for Willa's condition, the doctor explained, showing them complex diagrams that Judd didn't understand. It's a long road, but we are very, very optimistic. You got her here at the right time, Mr. Cole. Sitting in that sterile white office, hearing those words, Judd finally felt the true weight of his victory. This was the prize. Not the money, not the fame, but this quiet, clinical promise of a future for his daughter. A few days later, while sitting in the hospital's waiting area during one of Willa's pre-op assessments, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. It was Sloane Devereaux. She looked strikingly out of place amongst the worried families and worn-out linoleum floors. Yet she walked in as if she owned the building. She didn't offer pleasantries. She got straight to the point. The campaign we planned is dead, she said, her voice low. Judd looked up, confused. What? Dead, she repeated. Cancelled. The commercials, the press tour, the Legends brand. It's all wrong. She pulled up a chair and sat opposite him, a rare act of placing herself on his level. I watched your interview, and I watched the public's reaction. I spent a fortune trying to manufacture a hero, a symbol of untamable strength. But the public doesn't want the ghost. They don't care about the champion. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp and analytical. They care about the janitor. They connected with the father who was willing to face his demons for his child. Your authenticity, your vulnerability, that's the asset, and it can't be sold on a billboard. Judd waited, unsure where this was going. I've torn up your contract, she said plainly. His heart stopped. You what? The performance and endorsement contract, she clarified. It's void, but our other agreement stands. The $50 million is still being placed in trust for Willa. Consider it payment for services rendered, just not the services I originally intended. She slid a new, much thinner folder across the table toward him. This is a new proposal. Hesitantly, Judd opened it. It wasn't a contract. It was a charter for a non-profit foundation, the Cody Ryan Foundation for Injured Riders. Its mission was to provide financial support, medical care, and mental health resources for rodeo athletes and their families who had been impacted by severe injury or tragedy. The foundation's starting endowment was a staggering sum, personally donated by Sloane Devereaux. The public wants to give, Sloan explained. All business. They want to be a part of your story. This gives them away. Devereaux Industries gets to be the corporate sponsor. It's good for our image, and it does some actual good in the world. Win-win. She looked at him. The foundation needs a president. Someone who understands the risks of the sport. Someone who can speak with authentic authority about the price these athletes pay. Someone the community trusts. Judd stared at the documents, at Cody's name printed in bold, elegant type. For 10 years, his friend's memory had been a source of private pain and guilt. Here, Sloan was offering him a chance to turn it into a public legacy of help and healing. He could honor his friend in a way he never thought possible. He wouldn't be a marketing puppet. He would be helping people. There are no media circuses, Sloan said, anticipating his fears. No commercials, just a few charity events a year. You tell your story, your way. You run the foundation. You make sure what happened to your friend, and to you, helps the next generation. 6 months later, Judd stood on a small stage in a quiet, respectful ballroom. He wore a simple suit that fit him comfortably. He was speaking at the inaugural fundraising dinner for the Cody Ryan Foundation. He wasn't the cocky ghost of his youth, nor was he the haunted janitor from the ranch. He was simply Judson Colton, a man who had found his purpose. He spoke of his friend, of the risks and rewards of a dangerous life, and of the profound, healing power of community. In the front row, Sloan Devereaux watched, not as a boss, but as a reluctant admirer. And beside her, holding her hand, was Willa. Her cheeks were rosy, her breathing was easy, and her smile was bright and boundless. Her heart, once a fragile, failing muscle, was now strong and whole. After the speech, Judd joined them. He knelt and hugged his daughter, the simple, profound joy of her healthy embrace the only reward he had ever truly needed. He had walked through the fire of his past and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but transformed. He had lost the quiet, anonymous life he thought he wanted, but he had gained something far greater in its place. He hadn't just saved his daughter's life. He had finally found a way to truly live his own. And there we have it. A quiet moment in time, shared between us. Before it fades, I'm curious. What's the atmosphere where you are right now? A peaceful evening, the middle of a busy day, a long drive at dawn? I love getting a small glimpse into the world where these stories are heard. If you enjoy sharing these moments of escape, consider subscribing and ringing that bell. It's the surest way to guarantee we can set aside time for another one soon. Your support, even just a like, makes all of this possible. Thank you again for your time, truly. Wishing you a good one, wherever you are.